Yeah,
it's all about finding what you're passionate about, challenging yourself and growing.
Before I came here, I thought I was really bad at history, but after taking several history classes, I realized how much I love history.
That's what LFA does in here. It brings out your inner desires.
I think the most special thing that I feel about LFA is diversity.
We have diversity of color, diversity of gender, diversity of sexuality, and diversity of thought.
We have so many different cultures here, but at the same time, our community is so strong.
LFA really integrates everyone into the community.
It's really just a great space for all of us to be able to interact with each other.
Being a boarder at LFA is such a tremendous change in your life. You get to be so independent.
Our friends are always around us, and we get to go out for weekend activities together, like go to movies, dinner.
You get to explore the school, you get to be with your friends, and you get to have fun.
Coming to Lake Forest Academy was one of the best decisions I have ever made.
Don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone.
Be open to new ideas. Be yourself.
LFA is not a school that has a one-size-fits-all kind of student. If you're a person who's curious, passionate,
Willing to do new things, work hard.
I highly encourage you to join our community.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our 13th annual LFA Chicago Networking event. I think that was a pretty great admissions video, and certainly for those of us who want to spread the word about Lake Forest Academy, you can see that the Academy is in good hands, especially with John Strudwick, our head of school. John, now in his 17th year. And what's interesting for me to think about, over the years I've served as a parent, I've served on the board, I chaired the board, but 18 years ago, along with two other individuals who are here, Bruce Anderson and Ned Jessen, we were serving on the search committee which selected John Strudwick to be head of school. And one of the things that was important to us in selecting the next head of school at that time was somebody who would be able to engage the alums and the school community, both parents, faculty, students, and the greater community. And one of the things, John has embraced that in many ways, but one of the things that he truly embraced was this Chicago networking event. And so John, I want to thank you for supporting it all these years, breathing life into it, and getting us all here again today for our 13th annual. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. On behalf of Lake Forest Academy, I would like again to welcome everybody to this 13th annual Chicago networking event hosted by Northern Trust. And I really do want to thank Kate and Rick Waddell for helping to make this event happen. I mean, the partnership between the Academy and Northern Trust over these years has really been a huge part of why we've been so successful. So thank you so much for all of your personal support and to Northern Trust as a whole. So please. The objective of the Chicago networking event is to provide a productive networking and professional development opportunity for our Chicago area alumni, parents, and their associates, to highlight the strengths of the LFA community and to forge connections among its members. In addition to our alumni and parents today who are here, we're also joined by members of our Board of Trustees, including Mike Shell, who's flown in from Massachusetts, who's the board chair, as well as several life trustees around. I won't name everybody, but thank you all for being here. And we're also fortunate to have really the kind of one-off, but actually the originator of the Chicago networking event, David Gupta, class of 1979, who's here with us today. It was David years ago for the Academy to organize this networking event around a world-class panel and the LFA community. And I think 13 years later, he should be very proud of the success of his idea. Not only do we create an opportunity for networking, but we also hope that we are able to provide a meaningful presentation and discussion on an important social or business topic. Today, we will be examining issues of information, and dare I say it, truth, as we discuss the current state of journalism in the US and the world. I also speak to you all today proud to be the head of Lake Forest Academy. I hope you enjoyed the video. It gave us a nice little glimpse of LFA today. We're a school with strong admissions, impressive college placement, excellent and continuously improving facilities, including that spectacular student union building, innovative teaching, and most importantly, a great and diverse student body representing 40 different countries and 17 states who are engaged in demanding, imaginative and creative work in the classrooms. We're a school that has a clear mission of education and promoting in our students excellence of character, scholarship, citizenship and responsibility, the 4 pillars of our mission, as well as educating the whole child so that our students are exposed to excellence in academics, athletics and the arts. I'm proud to note, promoting Lake Forest Academy, that we've been recognized by Niche as the #1 school in Illinois and the 16th ranked boarding school across the entire United States. And that's a pretty great achievement for a school with an endowment that's a fraction the size of those of the other top 15 schools, such as Andover and Exeter. We will get there. We will get, Mr. Jessen, will we get there?
Yes!
We will get there. Our theme today is Journalism Dead. It's a topic of great significance to all of us in today's world. There continues to be an important role for journalists to play to ensure that everyone, especially our students, have access to the truth and the schools are teaching with a knowledge of balanced information rather than, dare I say, sort of canned propaganda. Today, LFA hopes to further discussion on the role and importance of journalism. Our panelists will share their insight, experience and expertise on the topic, and I think it promises to be an illuminating and fascinating discussion. For the format today, I'm going to introduce each speaker in turn, who will speak for about 5 minutes. Make sure if they go over, can wait. And once all the panelists are presented, I'm going to then probably start off with a question, but then open it to the floor for a question and answer session, which the panelists are very much looking forward to. So we will begin. Our first speaker is Randy Baumgarten, LFA class of 1967. After LFA, Randy earned a BA in Economics from Oberlin College in 1971 and an MBA and MS in Journalism from Columbia University in 1973. Began his broadcasting career with General Electric Broadcasting Company in that year. He's held numerous positions in both radio and television within that company until in September 1981 he became Vice President for radio. In 1984, he became President of NBC Radio, overseeing the company's 8 radio stations and 4 radio networks. Most recently, he was the chairman and CEO of Bompton Media Group, which operated a significant number of television stations in 8 different markets. Randy has served on many boards, including the National Association of Broadcasters, and he was the chairman of the Radio Music License Committee. Most importantly, of course, Randy was inducted into Lake Forest Academy's Hall of Fame in 1986, and, I found out last night, was once the only student in an LFA class on classical Greek. Please welcome Randy Baumgarten.
Well, thank you very much, John. It is a great pleasure to be here with so many others of the LFA community. And what a great group you appear to be. I can only tell you that the lessons I learned at LFA a long, long time ago have stuck with me my whole life. And for those of you particularly who are young and have your life ahead of you, I guarantee you, you will remember the things that happened to you at LFA. So this is a very interesting topic. And what I want to do is just throw out a few thoughts just kind of get our brains going here on discussing the question of whether journalism is dead. And I thought I'd start by talking about what is journalism. What is the definition of journalism? And so, of course, like all of you probably would do, I Googled it. And the answer came back. I'll read it. It's the collection, writing, and dissemination of news on traditional and digital media. That's what you'll read if you Google that definition. But to me, it's always meant a lot more than that. To me, it implies a sense of thoroughness, fairness, reliance on facts, as well as telling stories in a clear, concise, fair, and compelling way. When I think about journalism, that's how I think about it. I think that's the context that we ought to think about as we go through some of these issues that are facing journalism today. And to answer the question, is journalism dead? I don't think it is. Most certainly isn't. You can get it in a lot of places. But it does face serious challenges, and those challenges come in many forms. When I think about it and where we are in history, I think we are either entering or have entered or are into what I call the post-mass media era. The post-mass media era. Most of us grew up in the mass media era, where all of the information was funneled through mass media, and that was our major source of information. But that is no longer the case. Is mass media going to go away? No, of course it's not. It's going to be around. But it's not going to have the primacy that it's had over the last 75 years, let's say. Which is, I think, roughly the mass media era. There are several things that are impacting this, that are causing this change. And I'll address them one by one and just throw out a few things about each one of them. The four areas are technology, economics, socio-political, and what I call self-inflicted wounds. We'll talk about each of those. The technology we're all experiencing. And rather than talk about specific technologies, I just thought I'd mention a few of the things that are being impacted by technology. The first is addressability. You can now address individuals or groups of individuals as you wish. You don't have to throw out the broad net anymore and hope that who you want comes in. You can address people individually or in groups. And as part of that, people are now self-curating. Historically, in the mass media era, it was the media that curated the content and decided what you'd see and what you won't see. That is no longer the case. We now get to choose what we want. Speed has become more important than accuracy. Everybody has access to distribution. It used to be you couldn't get the word out. You had to go through that pipeline. Now you can do it yourself. There's nothing to stop you. And the technology allows us to alter messages, create false messages, change messages that are meant to mean one thing into something else. And finally, of these ideas, it's changed measurement, how you measure media impact, how often you can get it, how frequently you get the feedback, how quickly you get the feedback. And then there's interactivity. Media used to be a one-way street. There was the recipient and there was the deliverer. That is no longer the case. Now it's interactive. And all those technologies are impacting journalism because journalism now has to be conducted in a different way in light of these new realities. The second category is economics. And I'm going to give you some data here. I'll try not to give you too much because it can be stunning if you get too much. But I'm going to talk about each of the media and what's happened to each of the media from an economic standpoint very, very briefly. And I'll start with print. Because the print media, particularly daily newspapers, have been decimated by the new technology. And just to give you a sense of how big that has been. In 1984, newspaper circulation was 63 million people, over 63 million. In 2016, which was the last year I could get data for, it was 34 million. A loss of 45%. It started from 1984 and moved down, but the decline was slow for a number of years. Of all of that loss, 60% of that loss has taken place in the last 10 years. So it's a tremendous, tremendous impact. Newspaper advertising now, the money spent in advertising in newspapers, comprises less than 5% of all advertising. Between 2013 and 2016, that's a space of 3 years, 10% of the daily newspapers in America went out of business. They went away. So this has been a tremendous impact. The ones that exist that are continuing are striving to make the transition. The jury remains out on whether that's actually going to work or not. They're working very hard on it. So that's the newspaper business. The television business is a little different. It's not doing great, but it's hanging in there. Television advertising has been roughly flat from a share standpoint. It's been growing slightly, it's grown about 6% over the last several years. But it's lost share over that time. And television has been rescued by the development of a second revenue stream. For years and years and years, television only made money from advertising. But over the last 10 years, television has started to obtain revenue from selling the rights to broadcast the program by cable and satellite. You've seen the impact of some of this as maybe some of you have experienced outages when people can't come to terms on what that price should be. But it's that stream of revenue that's actually preserving television as we go forward and still makes it relevant. But viewership has been declining, just not precipitously. Live viewing, that is viewing to television on a live basis, has declined 6% over the last 3 years. In the meantime, time spent on apps or on the internet on a smartphone have more than doubled over that period of time. So you can see the impact of how people are using video. Live television is still ahead, but now more than the ratio of video watched on a smartphone or working with apps is 60% of the time that you spend watching television, which is a tremendous shift because 2 years ago it was a 4-to-1 ratio. So that's a big, very, very big change. So from an economic standpoint, who is winning? Well, that's easy. It's digital. Digital has grown 55% since 2014, and 31% of all advertising is now digital advertising. Television, 17%. That gives you a sense of that whole thing. The growth is going to slow, but it still will be the fastest growing medium over the next 8 years, and the share of digital is going to go to 39%, so it's really going to continue to grow. Almost 80% of that digital revenue is in the hands of 2 companies. You know what they are? Google?
Amazon.
Facebook. Google and Facebook. In fact, the size of Google and Facebook, each one of them separately, is almost the size of the entire television industry. Everything in television. So, I mean, that's the nature. It's a tremendous amount of power in the hands, economic power in the hands of those 2 companies. And that's something to think about. Maybe we can talk about that later as part of the Q&A. So let me just, I'm long already, right? Sociopolitical, I'm sorry about it. It always happens to me. Sociopolitical is really about the fact that people, because they are now enabled, prefer to talk to people that they already agree with and prefer to hear things that they already agree with, as opposed to reaching out and being open-minded and hearing the other side, because they don't have to. Before they had to, because it all came through the same pipe. It was curated. Now you have your choice. You can just talk to your friends. or to people that you agree with. And that's a really big issue. And added to that is that it's in the political interest, it's in the interest of the politicians to break down the trust between media and society, because it increases their power. And so that's another factor that's going on. Self-inflicted wounds is the fourth item. First of all, I think one of the things that media has made a big mistake on is that they've risen to the bait. You know, they react to the criticisms, they defend themselves, and they take sides. And as a journalist, you really just never do that. I think it's a big mistake. Particularly on the television side, there's a focus on not necessarily great journalism, but on superficiality. How do things look? How quick are they done? You know, what's the pacing, so forth and so on, as opposed to, is this a really good story and what are we really trying to say here? So I think that's a second, and I can say that because I've been part of it. So it's a self-criticism. And particularly in the battle between entertainment and news too often loses in favor of entertainment. I do think, though, that there's still a great hunger for great journalism. I've done a lot of research in my time running television stations, and every time we do it, the consumer says, what we really want are the facts. And so for people who, if we can deliver on that, and really do that job, then there's a great future for journalists going into the future. There are a number of people here, I think, that are budding journalists who go to LFA right now. Can you raise your hands? Great. Well, I've worked with a lot of young journalists over the years, particularly those who have come into first jobs in journalism and television. I've worked with a lot of them. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you a few do's and one don't. Here's my list of do's. There are 9 of them. Be curious. Be persistent. Be fair. Be open. Read and watch all the news you can with a critical eye. Look at it. What do you think about it? Was it good? Was it bad? And why? Know yourself. Learn your own biases, because you'll need to adjust for them when you do your reporting. When you cover a story, know what the story is about. It's the biggest issue that I have found with people. They go out and they cover something, and you ask them, well, what's the story? I don't know. I'm going to put something on television, but I don't really know what the story is. So you have to know what the story is about. Back in the old days, they used to, if you've seen old movies, they used to say, what's the angle? It's that kind of thing. What is the story about? And practice writing stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's nothing more important in journalism than telling a story. And it's got to make sense. It's like any other story. It's got the beginning, it's got the middle, it's got the climax. You make the point. You have to practice, and you got to learn how to do that. And finally, among my do's is find a mentor. I had several in my career, starting at LFA. I had a mentor. I had a master. We called them masters at the time, who watched over me and took care of me. You need to have those people along the way. And finally, my don't. Give up. Don't give up. It's going to get tough. It's going to get difficult. It's a very hard profession. But if you really want to do it, and if you persist, you will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Our second speaker is Kathy Neustadt, Ferry Hall class of 1974. Kathy holds a BA in Mass Communication from University of Denver and began her career in radio as a news director of a small station in Leadville, Colorado. Kathy moved on to be a news writer at KCNC Television in Denver and is currently a freelance field producer for ABC News based in Denver. She has been with the network since '93 and has covered several major news stories in the western US, including O.J. Simpson, I think both the chase and the trial, the Oklahoma City bombing trials, the Columbine shooting, the death of Joan Benet Ramsey, and the Aurora movie theater shooting. Kathy has received several awards, including the 2015 Mizell Center's Cultural Achievement Award and the University of Oklahoma Regents Award. Most importantly, she was honored by LFA with her sisters, Susan and Nancy, as Ferry Hall Women of Distinction in 2010, where they were also able to celebrate their father's 90th birthday in Reed Hall. Please welcome Kathy Newstead.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. John was not my headmaster, which is why I'm here. If he had been my headmaster, I don't think I would have been asked to be here. But I think what's interesting is that you will see from all four of us that there are certain themes that I think we all will cover that are the same in what's going on with journalism. I come from a somewhat different perspective than others in that I am freelance. And that means I only work when I'm called to work. Sometimes that's a lot. Other times it's really dry and barren and scary. But I've learned through my 25 years of freelance work that where I get the most work is usually when I have to cover the hardest stories. The ones that I've gotten the most days from, the biggest paychecks from, have been the ones that John mentioned, covering the Oklahoma City trials, both Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, the Columbine shooting, and the Aurora theater shooting. Really incredibly hard stories to cover. My work is kind of like a double-edged sword. I want the phone to ring, and then I dread when the phone rings. It's usually a bad news. Not all, by the way. I cover some very fun, interesting stories, but it's news and it's my job, and I try to cover it in the best, most accurate way possible. But in the effort to tell the story, especially in a breaking news situation, especially when there are so many outlets covering the same story, even within your own network. I work for ABC and I compete with Good Morning America, the nightly news show, and Nightline, and even there's competition for the interviews. But you know, I have to get a grasp of, just like Randy said, what the story is. I have to get the interview. Of course, they want me to be the first to get the interview. And it really feels more like a sprint than a well-paced race. So I really just do the best job that I can in the fairest, most accurate way. But still, journalists are facing, right now, this fake news phenomenon. And I feel like journalists are in the middle of a huge credibility crisis. I think we are concerned with the public's perception of our industry. There was a study done last year of 1,500 journalists, and 91% of them who were surveyed said they believe the media is much less trusted than in past years, and that actually it's at an all-time low. So the question, is journalism dead? It's definitely not dead, but the lack of credibility, and with so many now questioning it, it remains among the biggest issues that are facing journalists, and it has to be addressed. Part of that challenge, again, like Randy said, is how people are getting their news. 2/3 of the American public get their news from social media, mostly Twitter and Facebook. And the news they often read comes from sources most likely skewed to the opinions that they most likely identify with. On both Twitter and Facebook, you get bite-sized headlines, but you pick which news you choose to see. So I might pick MSNBC, NBC, PBS, New York Times, CNN, ABC. And a certain somebody else might choose Fox or Rush Limbaugh or Breitbart to get a very different perspective, and hence the divisions in our country. It's really like a Rorschach of test of facts. You know, you feel one way, you switch to one outlet to confirm your feelings or facts, and if you feel another, you change the station. It's a shift, and it's a dangerous one. Gone are the days when there was just ABC, CBS, NBC, we had Walter Cronkite and Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings, and we had one newscast a day, And now there's 24/7 cable news. There's analysis, there's opinions, 24/7. And again, you're getting headlines and bite-sized news. My 17-year-old, he gets his news from Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and South Park. That's where he gets his news. So really, there's so much to talk about on this subject. The one example that I'm going to use to defend why I feel so strongly that journalism is very much alive and working is the Larry Nassar case. A team of investigative journalists from the Indiana newspaper followed up on the story of one gymnast who allegedly was sexually abused by the teen doctor. So this team of journalists dug deeper and they exposed the horrors of this man. And it wasn't one girl who was abused, it was 156. And he's now serving 40 to 175 years in prison. So journalism in this case stopped this predator and even drew praise from the judge in the trial, publicly praising the First Amendment and saying, thank God we have journalists who expose the truth. So that's a great example to me of how journalism is still very much alive. It's changed, it's changing, it always has, it always will. It's up to us to keep up with the rapid pace and to try to stay ahead of it. So I think to do that, we have to continue to be neutral, to be fair and balanced, and stick to the facts no matter where they lead you. We need to hold public officials and others accountable when it's needed. And we really have to ask questions, listen, and continue to provide avenues to preserve and rebuild the consumer's trust. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Our third speaker is Mike Leonard, Lake Forest Academy class of 1966. Mike received his BA in economics in 1970 from Providence College, where he also played on the hockey team. After college, Mike worked as a TV reporter and anchor in Arizona before joining NBC News in 1980. He's covered political conventions, presidential inaugurations, World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, and much more. Most often, though, he can be found, and still being found, roaming America, looking for the true characters and humorous situations of everyday life. Most famously, in January of '04, Mike took his aging parents on a one-month cross-country RV adventure that became the basis of a four-part Today show and then a New York Times best-selling book. Mike's latest project is In Common, a nationally syndicated Channel 11 show out of Chicago, focused on everyday people and aspects of life we share in common. Most importantly, Mike served as a member of the Lake Forest Academy Board of Trustees, and he was inducted into the Academy's Hall of Fame in 1991. And he is currently working with Lake Forest Academy and our students on a Global Generation film project. Please welcome Mike Leonard.
Thanks, John. Randy, you fired me from any of your TV stations because I came about it a totally different way. First of all, I don't watch TV news. I worked for 32 years for NBC News, and I never watched it then. I hardly ever watch it now. I'm just not a TV guy. I don't like analysis. I don't like opinions on TV. I'd rather find out what the truth is. The truth will set you free. I'll give you a little bio about how this came about. I wasn't a good student. I had to repeat my senior year, which put me at LFA. I wanted to play hockey in college and couldn't get in with the academic record I had. And when I was there, I learned a lot about myself. And what I learned was that I wasn't what I appeared to people. I wasn't the D student. I wasn't sort of the dumb guy. The teachers and my fellow students saw something else. It was small enough and all the rest. So I started to feel that I did know some things. And I also learned that I don't want to make a judgment before I know what's going on. And I found out in my life, I did over 1,000 stories at NBC, that nothing was like what I thought it would be until I got there. And that became my mantra, basically. So many times, I would go out to a story without a story, Now, I knew I had to find a story, but I didn't want a preconceived notion. Back to the bio a little bit, I went to Providence College and I played hockey there. I found out I could play at a high level, even though people said I couldn't. I wanted to observe life, and I wanted to spread the story, but I was too quiet to do that. I didn't speak much. I certainly didn't write. While I was in college, I wrote a letter to my girlfriend every day for 4 years, and I didn't realize that that was journalism, because I was basically pouring my heart out about life. It was during Vietnam and all the rest. But it wasn't being graded, so I didn't know I was a writer yet. I graduated, I failed the physical, I've got a scoliosis curved spine, so I didn't go to Vietnam. Went to Phoenix, tried out for a hockey team, a professional hockey team, didn't make it. My wife and I settled there. We had 3 children quickly. I purchased a movie camera while I was in college to sort of document life, start documenting it. And from that movie camera came my first tryout at a TV station. A friend of mine suggested I do that. I did. I got a job, and I came into that job with that same mindset that I'm going to go someplace with a fresh mind, because people totally misread me all my life, and I'm sure I've misread a lot of people. So I wouldn't go in there with a preconceived notion. And when, after a year in Phoenix, NBC hired me, I had that same approach. And soon after I started, they, and Kathy, you know this is rare, they said, yeah, I can do any story I want. I didn't have to have an assignment. And that was a great honor, because they trusted me to tell a story that was true. And I did that because when I went out to those stories, I tried not to have a preconceived notion. And so what I would do, for instance, there was a political convention in Chicago in the 90s. I think it was Clinton, I think. And they asked me from the Today Show, just if you want to find a story, just we'd like one from you, but I can pick my own. So I drove around and I scouted it, and I looked at, they're beautifying the area around where the convention was, and the cliched story was, well, they clean up that area, but the rest of the city's not clean, and all the rest. And I started thinking about people who do clean the cities. Started thinking about the people, the workers. That's more my nature. And I thought, who does clean these cities and doesn't get credit? Because the politicians are taking credit for it. I clean up the cities. So I started thinking of, in contrast, of bright light of a spotlight, politician taking credit, and then I wanted to find somebody with no light. So literally I went light and dark. Is there anybody who works under the city? So I made some phone calls, and this took a few days, and one person said, well, you could always do a story on the Rat Man. I said, a rat man? Like half rat, half man? Like, no, the guy who gets rid of rats. So I thought, I can't show rats on morning TV. Today Show, but I thought I ought to talk to him. It was Terry Howard, and Chicago had a reputation then for being a very clean city, according to the rat population. Terry was doing his job, but nobody knew about Terry. I mean, most of the people didn't know about him. He was about a 75-year-old Irishman, import from Ireland. And I went down to see him without deciding yet to do the story. I thought, well, I'll check out this guy, see if he's worth the story. And he had a little metal desk in the bowels of some building, and he smoked back then. And the only adornment he had was a picture of a rat with a circle and a slash through it right behind him. So I go, so Terry, what's the rats? Do you hate rats? And he was like Clint Eastwood from Unforgiven. He's real calm. He goes, I don't have any hate in my heart for the rat, but I'll kill you when I come across. Kind of interesting guy here. And then I said, how many rats are there in Chicago, Terry? He said, Michael, when I took the job, there were 2 million rats. I got down to 800,000. And I know them all by first name. Yeah, I'm gonna do this guy, I'm gonna do this story. So I did the story, and it was basically the story of a regular guy doing his job, getting no credit. We filmed him under the city with the illumination of his flashlight, and we cut it against pictures of a spotlight, a politician. And it was just a story, a true story about what goes on underneath the surface. In all my life, and all my years at NBC and beyond, I've wanted to know what's going on under the surface, because we've gotten too surfacey, real quick opinions about this, this, and this. And we'll get into the issues about fake news, which I have a lot of opinions about, but primarily it's about the truth, and it's about not following and being duped by images. And when you go into a story and you go, I want to find out the truth without preconceived notions, that's the first step you have to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I learned something about rats. Our final speaker is Kiki Glenau, Lake Forest Academy, class of 2006. Kiki graduated in 2010 from NYU, where she earned her BA in journalism, English, and creative writing. After NYU, Kiki worked in digital media, spending more than 6 years at the Huffington Post, where after starting as a journalist, she became the Director of Growth and Analytics. As the head of the HuffPost audience development team, including social distribution, editorial analytics, and HuffPost labs, she counseled the media on such topics as, if you want to connect with teens, go niche. Something the LFA teachers are learning. She is currently the CEO and co-founder of an early-stage media startup, Coast Media, for Generation Z or Z, and she also works with social media influencers, small businesses, and media companies to grow their digital brands. Most importantly, she is a great representative of our young alums, and someone, unlike the other alums, whom I'm proud to have watched grow and graduate during my tenure at Lake Forest Academy. Please welcome Kiki Glenau.
Thank you. It's amazing to be on this panel with such impressive colleagues. So I think, as you've heard everyone say, that I think that the title of this event is Journalism Dead is probably the most softball question we'll get today. We've all said with enthusiasm, absolutely not. But I do think it has changed a lot. So, answering that question, no, journalism is not dead, I started thinking about, well, what is the future of media and journalism? And that's something that John asked us to think about. So I started thinking about my time at HuffPost. I was there for a little over 6 years, and that has been the majority of my career in media. Thinking about what the landscape was when I started at HuffPost and what it is now and what it's been in between. And I really kind of discovered through thinking about it that it is so cyclical. When I first started at HuffPost, it was all about community editors and moderators. Commenters on digital media platforms were the holy grail. We at HuffPost gave specific commenters certain VIP badges to say, you represent our audience, how great is it that you're engaging with us? And then with the social media boom that started probably 5-6 years ago, scale was everything for digital media publishers. We were all going after one big pot of audience and said, let's grab as many people as we can and bring them to us. That part of that era was probably the reason the title of this event came up. A lot of digital media brands, the way they went after scale in that way, it did compromise journalism in some respects. But I think now is a really interesting time, not only because of the state of journalism, but also the state of the business of media, that a lot of digital publishers are getting back to those niche communities. During that social media boom, local media disappeared, and you heard Randy give a lot of really upsetting facts about newspaper circulation, and that hit the local papers immensely. But a lot of digital media publishers now are starting to create niche brands for niche audiences because they know that that connection with a smaller audience is so important. So we went from community to scale, and now we're going back to community. Similarly, I think a lot of you maybe 6-10 years ago were, when it came to media, going to specific brands. If you wanted to learn about the news, you went to the New York Times. If you were interested in business journalism, you're going to the Wall Street Journal. A lot of different publications had these very unique value propositions. And then again, with social media and that scale effect, news became a commodity. At HuffPost, we had all of these content listening tools, analytics tools, where we would literally see, 50 different stories, the same story from 50 different publishers. Everyone was writing the same thing, and we were trying to grab, again, audience with those stories. And then now I think we're going back to, again, that unique value proposition. And that's where we're seeing a lot of new media businesses come back to things like subscription. During that massive explosion of social media, it was all about free access to content. And in that process, a lot of that unique value was lost. So I think coming back to that unique value proposition, we're getting back to different business models that media can pursue. And then also when I started at HuffPost, we had, as one of the first major digital media brands, a lot of people came to HuffPost through typing in www.huffingtonpost.com in their URL. For the past 5 years, that was not the case. Our homepage traffic was a tiny portion of what the traffic we would get to our most popular stories was. People were finding HuffPost and other digital media publishers in places where they were spending time on social media platforms. And we're seeing us now go back to brands as destinations. So, for example, the New York Times came out with their daily news podcast called The Daily, and they're finding major audience with that daily news show. So brands are really going back to creating something that where they own the audience instead of platforms like the Googles and Facebooks who own everything, and that has become a big problem for journalism. We're seeing publishers start to take back that relationship with readers and viewers and listeners. So I think, yes, when I think about journalism and where it's going, I think we have to think about where we've been, and I have seen that cyclical nature, especially within digital media. But I think all of that is going to be driven now by technology and data. We know more about our users now than we ever have. And access to journalism is bigger than it ever has been. You mentioned, I think circulation was 60 million? 63 million. And with the Huffington Post at our height, we were reaching 200 million users a month. So the incredible access that digital media has provided so many different people is a tremendous responsibility, but an awesome way that journalism is thriving as well. So yeah, I'm excited to get to the Q&A.
Okay, so I hope everybody's thinking of a few questions. I'm going to ask the first one while you're thinking of that, and panelists are going to all answer, some can, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to ask the question I told you I was going to ask. That would be too easy, and we've kind of done that. But I think something that came out is this question of how do we change this notion of the credibility that we currently have, or the credibility crisis with journalism as a whole, and maybe specifics, because some of the things that Randy, you said, and what I heard is, people, whether it's fake news, whatever, people just don't believe what the journalists are presenting. How do we change that?
I think it's things like that. I forget one of you said that we value speed over accuracy now. And I think a lot of that access, that kind of pervasiveness and ubiquity of journalism makes it so speed is very important. But I think in that process, quality has been lost a bit. So I think getting back to those foundations that you were talking about, Randy, of what journalism really is, speed can never be more important than accuracy. And I think a lot of news organizations would agree with that. But I think in practice, it's it's you want to be first because the news has become that commodity in some ways. But I think it's just getting back to those foundations of truth seeking and truth sharing.
I'll take a crack at it too. I think that the first thing we have to do is actually be accurate. And being accurate is harder than it appears. There have been a number of times over my career where I've been on the other side where people have interviewed me or whatever, and I saw what got printed and it had nothing to do with what I actually said. And I really think that it really begins with a commitment on the part of journalists to be factual and to look at things, as Mike said, with a fresh look, with no preconceived notions. I think that's critically important. And it has to be done consistently over and over again. And eventually I think people will catch on, but the first thing in getting credibility is to actually do what you say you do.
I don't actually think that it's going to come from the top. I think it's going to come from us, because there's too much money, there's too much political incentive to keep playing this dirty game that's being played. There's new technology coming out now that can put anybody and put words in anybody's mouth and make it look absolutely real, and it's going to be used. It has to be up to us. We have to decide what is true and what's not true. I just don't expect there's going to be a switch. You know why? Because it worked. The dirty tricks seemed to work. When I got into the business, live news was just happening, and all these stations were buying live trucks. And then they decided they had to use the live trucks. So they had to go live, and they would go live over silly things like ribbon cuttings and things like that. And then when reporters went to do the live shots, they had to have something to say, so they had to prepare something before they went out there to fill in the time. And pretty soon it became, well, how will it be an approach, an angle, an opinion, or if something happened, if an event happened and they went live, we all know that things are wrong so often, more than they're right. But nowadays, the things happen so fast that something that's spouted that is wrong is what we take to believe. And so I just don't tend, I'm not a pessimistic person, but I think it's always up to us to learn more about each other. We're working on a project right now in an African American school. We just did this project in a Latino neighborhood. I'm 70 years old. I feel that I'm as open as I can be to people who are not like me. I learned a whole lot this last week at the African American church and school about the opinions of African Americans that see life differently because of the history, because of life. And I just want to be a sponge. I want to keep learning. But I think all of us have to do that and not kill the messenger.
I think we're in a really pivotal, scary time right now, because whatever your politics are, there are lies being told, and it doesn't matter if you can use a soundbite to show that the truth has not been told. It doesn't matter. It just kind of gets swept under the rug, and it just keeps going and going. And I think that, so the political side, but then on the journalist side, they ask hard questions. They maybe are not answered, or they're not answered in the way they want. And I feel like we're in a place where it's really hard to talk to one another when you have different beliefs, and that there are bots and there are other, what are they called, bots, and some other fake news, well, the algorithms, there's just, trolls is the word I'm looking for. There's trolls. And so you really don't know what is real and what's not real. So, like I said, as a journalist, I think you just have to check and double check the facts and know that you're right. And when I first started in the field, you would give the facts, and they would take them and usually air them. Now, I have to have 3 different sources confirm before, and I mean, legal is going over it with a fine-tooth comb. And does ABC make mistakes? Yes. Brian Ross, who was a well-known investigative journalist, he got removed because he made an erroneous statement about Mike Flynn. Everybody went off on him, but the network did the right thing. They removed him. CNN's done it, some of the newspapers have done it. So that's what you got to do. When you make a mistake, you have to own up to it and punish the people. So I'm hoping that on our side, the journalist side, that they can continue to be held accountable also, and that they will be backed and they won't stand for erroneous information. So that's
Excellent answers. Questions from Mr. Shell? You can have the first one.
I was tempted to ask about the First Amendment, but I'll leave that to one side. Randy, you gave what seems to me to be the correct statement that if you ask people what they want facts. It's also, I think, fair to say that most polls will tell you that that if you ask people what they'd like from their government and their politicians, it's cooperation and bipartisan collaboration, if you will. And yet, the question I'm asking is, it seems that that is not what sells in journalism. I mean, you've spoken to it a little bit, that we talk to people that agree with us. What we see in journalism to a great degree is key to people who agree with what they're hearing, as opposed to the ideal that Kathy just described, which certainly we agree with. Why do you think that is? And is there a disconnect there somewhere, or what is the? How do you reconcile those?
Well, I think all of what you said is true. What I can tell you, the approach that we've taken when we were operating the stations about this issue is to engage in the storytelling in something we call process journalism, which is when you're telling people what the facts are, you also explain how you got them. So you need to let people see through how the story is being gathered, how the story is being made. And that should help if it's done on a consistent basis. Most people don't do that. But if that were done on a consistent basis, because the issue is people don't know whom to believe. And so you really have to get very specific and very clear about what you did to put this together and to show that these are the facts. And look, it's a process. It's hard. But I really think that if journalists do that it will help over the long run in getting people back to believing that, yeah, these people are really working. They're not just espousing opinions or prejudging things on their own. We did have some success with it. Because we knew from our research that fact-based reporting was important, we actually measured ourselves every year. We did research to determine whether we were living up to that image or not, and then try to understand if we were or not, what we needed to do to improve. On that score. I actually think it can be done, but you need to work at it, and you really need to engage in this kind of process journalism.
Kathy, excuse me. You said something that was really interesting in regard to the issue of people wanting the facts and being able to find the facts, but in journalism there's really no labeling that says, hey, this is entertainment, this is fake, and this is real. Wouldn't it be in the best interest of the industry to impose some kind of self-regulatory standard before the politicians and the real regulators do? Or is that just impossible because of our Constitution and other things?
Well, I think Mike was going to speak, or Mike Shell was going to ask about the First Amendment, and like everything, it's such a wide open field that it's hard to. It's like the Second Amendment. If you try to take away any part of it, people get upset about it. But the answer I can give you is that I don't know what kind of regulation you could do. I feel like it is self-regulated and that there is what is the word that Dana Lesh said, the legacy media, which I assume would be the ABC, CBS, it's the CNNs, the MSNBC, the Fox, that they have ethics and they're trying to do the right thing. You have National Enquirer, you have the Star, you have other organizations. I don't know how you regulate. I guess you just hope with politicians, with any kind of controversial subject, that you get the facts and you can decide and you can have some critical thinking. It's hard to do that right now with social media, with what Randy said, the speed of all of a sudden you're getting comments. I don't know if you look on Twitter, but if you post one thing and anybody has an issue with it, you are just rammed into the ground and you never want to show your face again. And people do it because they're anonymous. And there's a whole thing with anonymity now that people can say what they want without having to be held accountable. So I think the best you can do is self-regulation. I don't think the FCC talks about truth, and holding accountable, but, maybe Mike, you have a...
They used to have the standards. I mean, when I started, there was a journalistic handbook, and it was somewhat the heyday of, I'm talking television journalism, and we couldn't do certain things, and the FCC had more power back then. And there was a thing called the Fairness Doctrine, and that went away. That went into effect in the late 40s, and it was basically you have to give the other side their say. And it was cumbersome, and there were some reasons why it wasn't working, but in the sense when it went away, it gave rise to, sort of the talk radio, Rush Limbaugh and all the rest, who could just say things. And I think the war started when they just said, some of these talk radio hosts would say, don't believe anything you hear from the mainstream. And pretty soon the well was poisoned. And I, as a journalist, and I was doing feature stories, I wasn't doing political stuff, but I would go down to Mississippi or Georgia or whatever, and people were very polite to me and said, I'm sorry I don't watch you because I know you guys make up the news. And I said, no, I've never heard that. So, I know you do, but I said, where do you work? In the drugstore. I said, but I worked there. I've been there for 25 years. I said, no, I know you make up the news, but you seem like a nice fellow anyway. And there was absolutely no way I could talk to that person, or many people out of that, because that well was poisoned. And how do you unpoison it? I don't know. That's why I say it has to be, it's up to us to be smart and to see for what reasons are people saying this? Why are they saying that this is a lie, that this scientific report is a lie? Why are they saying that? Well, there's a reason, there's an incentive for it, and we can't be fools and we can't be sheep. So unfortunately, it's not, you can't snap your fingers and do it, but we don't always have to accept it. And these revolutions start from the ground. And I'd rather just, I'd rather learn everything I can about something. I'm an imperfect human being in a huge way, but I don't want to be dumb. And I want to hear from both sides of the story, so, and I don't want to be used. I hate to be used.
The social media platforms are actually also taking a crack at regulation. Facebook, for example, is rolling out a program to put a badge on all stories on Facebook and rank different publishers in terms of trustworthiness. So, because that is where audiences are finding news, I think the platforms, putting it on them a little bit to regulate, I think is a smart move.
You have?
Yeah. On the same subject, where's the place for the fact checkers that in the last 4 or 5 years you see actually the press, the traditional journalists actually citing to the fact checkers to confirm that the story that's being told is true, and then you have the attacks on the fact checkers. Where does that, where does the fact checker come into play in the effort to keep journalism alive?
Yeah, and how unbiased are the fact checkers? That's the question. But that's what worries me about the the new situation where you can make anybody say anything computer. Therefore, do we stop believing anything? You know, right? I remember, you know, with the famous Access Hollywood tape, and President Trump saying, "I never said that." Well, in very short time, they'll be able to sort of digitally prove that. So it's here, see, I can say it, I wasn't there. And if what happens then is we stop believing everything, and that's the real danger. So it's a good question. I mean, I was duped myself recently after the recent shooting in Florida, and I quoted it to my colleague and my wife. I said, "Yeah, with the 18th school shooting since the beginning of the year," and then I found out that the source that the journalist got the 18th school shootings from is an actual source, but they count any school shooting, any time a gun goes off on the grounds of a school. One of them was a school that was closed for 40 years. Well, one was in a parking lot of the school. It was at midnight. There was no students there. It was an accidental situation or a robbery that was right on that corner. So it wasn't 18, but I spread that myself. You know, I just thought that was it. And I caught myself, I go, you gotta be careful here. And I gotta also just rely on human nature a lot. And that whole thing that I used to still tell myself that it's not what I think it is until I learn more. No place has ever been that, no person has ever been that. So I'm really careful now, but I'm afraid that you know, there's so much incentive to further poison the well because it has worked, and we have to rise up against that somehow.
Bruce.
My question goes to bias in the media, which is perceived, I guess bias would be the right way of putting it. And so related to what's been talked about, in my profession, I'm a volume consumer of journalism, of media. And I get frustrated because it's not necessarily what I'm hearing or reading, but it's what I'm not hearing or reading. What isn't included in it that should be in a thorough presentation of the facts. And Randy, you said two things that kind of struck me. You talked about the four pillars you were talking about, and one is that people have a choice today where they go to get their media where they didn't used to when I was growing up. And then the second one was the economics. Okay, so we have people having choices and they go to where they're comfortable. And then you have the pure economics of journalism today, which is really ratings-based. I mean, whether it's TV media or whatever form of media, you have to make money doing what you're doing, so it's ratings-based. So my question really is there bias? Is there an agenda-driven process here? And is it a top-down? If so, is it top-down? Because I'm not hearing any bias here at this level or your level of journalism. And I think the vast majority of people out there are honorable in what they do. But is there a business-motivated bias that's being created to meet that personal choice that people have?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no. It depends upon which media you're talking about. You know, so if you're looking at the networks, who, you know, ABC, NBC, CBS, basically, because Fox, as a network, doesn't really do news. Their news operations separate. I've been involved with all those networks. I've been involved with them for years and years. I knew all the people who ran them. I'm sure Mike did too. I swear there's no agenda. There's just no agenda at those places. But when you look at some of the cable networks, those businesses are built differently. They're not really built on news. They're built on developing a loyal audience of a certain type, whether it be on the right or on the left. It's not just one side, it's multiple sides. And they do build their business around promoting a certain point of view with respect to their talk shows, and it often creeps into their news. So, but their businesses are built that way. That's what they're intended to do. That's what they designed them for. Because you're right, at the end of this is a business. And to date, they are all ratings driven. And you get higher ratings if you offer opinion than you do if you just offer news. And so that's really what's driving those networks. And they're very successful, some of them. But their business is built that way.
And I think there's, you know, a scale in terms of bias. Some people might call a belief system bias. For example, at the Huffington Post, there were certain kind of just truths that we lived by. For example, for HuffPost, gay marriage was not a debate. We never approached it from that angle when we covered things like gay marriage. So I think some people would say that's a biased way to approach that issue. But there were definitely for us, things that were a universal truth to us, and that's the way we approached the news.
Chris, did you have a question?
Well, my question was kind of along the lines of the politicization of the media, particularly mass media. So regardless of your political bent, whether you lean left or right, you may go to so-and-so blog, which leans left or right, but mainstream media, TV in particular, or even major publications like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, it seems like there is a political bent on some of these organizations. And I think particularly the comment that Randy made about the cable networks. How do you see that evolving? Because it seems like there's so much not only opinion that is expressed, but also rumor and speculation that is expressed, which may or may not be backed up by fact. And you all talk about being factual and being accurate, but I don't get that sense when I see a lot of the mainstream media these days. Can you comment about that?
Well, I disagree a little bit with you because I see, I mean, I know there's Fox and MSNBC as probably the range, but the problem with cable, and I spoke to it a little bit, is they have to fill 24 hours of TV. So they will cover a news event, say a press conference, and then immediately go to a panel. And the panel will have two or three of one side, and then they'll have maybe one or two or another. And right there you see a division. And right there, the conversation turns to shouting. So it's really hard to kind of glean what's the facts and what's not. But in terms of the journalists that are in the room covering the press conference, there may be a bent of a bias, but I also think that they are trying to tell the truth. And I mean, we're in a day and age where the New York Times has to take out a full-page ad and CNN has to do an ad about this is an apple, seen that commercial, this is an apple, may not look like an apple to you, but it's an apple. And the New York Times has to say, we don't cover, we stand by what we cover. And I think that I think cable TV is changing, but everything, it's skewing everything to me. And then we can get into the digital part also. But I feel like the reporters out in the field for the most part, unless it's maybe MSNBC and Fox, but the middle people, they're trying to tell the truth. And then the opinion people, the pundits get on and they, then it gets into a battle and heated. I think they're trying to hold people accountable for not telling the truth. And I think that it all gets blurred and gray. We're in just a gray area. But I have to feel like the journalists that are out there trying to tell the story are trying to tell it factually. And I think that their organizations most likely will hold them accountable if they don't.
Time for one final question, if we will. So look, there's all sorts of people waving their hands. How are we going to do this? How am I going to decide who gets to ask the question? Yes, yeah.
Me? Oh.
No. Sorry.
I'm curious, as a kind of a piggyback to the previous question,
what you would tell the students at LFA to look for, or what criteria they should have to determine whether or not sources are accurate and reliable.
I'll real quickly say that in my experience there, the fact that it is such a internationally diverse place, and the Chinese students come in with a point of view about the Americans have a point of view about the Chinese, they soon learn that they're wrong about some of these misconceptions. So I think at LFA, unlike many schools, they're getting that first basic test in that, which is terrific. And what we have been telling them is it is not what it appears to be, and you've got to keep
being open-minded about it. We all have personal biases and fears and things like that. But I think, in our experience with LFA, they're ahead of the game. And I'm proud to say I'm an alum and doing this project because they've really impressed me. And I told John I've just been amazed at some of the knowledge and wisdom that a kid from Rwanda has, and somebody from China, and somebody from rural, Illinois. I think you're doing a terrific job, and I think that's the first step. You don't look like me. I want to know about you, and I'll tell you about me, and let's talk about the truth. So I think the school is doing a great job, and that's the future. That's what we hope. I hope happens. Globally, is that we're all human beings, and we can't be fooled. There are incentives, but we have to be above that.
Well, thank you for the panelists. I would sort of for me anyway, I would sum it up. Maybe journalism, as some of us kind of perceive it to be, and maybe journalism from the past might be dead, but journalism for the future, as it is evolving, is very much alive, and I think that was shown very much by the panel. So please join me in thanking the panelists. They will be up here for a little bit if anybody wants to come up and to say hi and ask any sort of personal or any question you didn't have. But thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you here again next year.